Hello everybody. It is a pleasure to see you. So today I wanted to talk about something I had found out. I got into a little bit of a rabbit hole and I want to talk to you guys about this is going to be the only time I'm going to attempt to pronounce this in the video. I am bad. I've had an American education, and as a result, pronouncing words that aren't close enough to my vernacular is generally not good. It's called Dhaqan Celis. It's basically just this word up here. And I'm going to refer to this as DC for the remainder of this video. So, what is DC? Well, in some cases, it is let me show you. Considered to be just kind of like, oh, your mom didn't teach you how to cook. Oh, are you really you need some DC? Well, what does DC mean? Well, technically, it means return to culture. That's basically a rough translation, and that's kind of the intent. It's like, you don't know how to do X or Y. You don't know how to do this. Oh, you need to return. You need to return to your culture, man. It is very reticent of, say, Thanksgiving clapback memes in November. It's very culture specific and entertaining, and it can be funny. Where it's not funny was where I found this nice woman's TikTok when I was scrolling last night, which kind of was the catalyst for me doom researching this. So let's break this down. This says, point of view. Your parents confiscated your passport, plus tried to leave you in Somalia, so you got to escape and reach the Canadian embassy in Nairobi to pick up an emergency copy and get the fuck out. And then you go to the description here, which says, which I will move my camera out of the way real quick so you guys can see. Imagine you're promised a vacay in Mombasa, but end up trapped in Mogadishu. DC survivors, we are here. So I saw that and I'm like, what the hell is DC? That hashtag I showed you isn't just culturally nice things or whatever. It's got some heinous shit in there too. It's not good. So I started researching a little bit because I'm like, this seems this is as absurd to me and other to me as something like genital mutilation, as far as women getting their vagina lopped off at a young age in certain countries. So, I wanted to do a little bit more research before I just completely castigated it. And castigated I shall, because one of the first things that popped up was a fucking Reddit post where it says, I think I'm being tricked to go to DC and I don't know what to do. So basically, I'm currently 17 and a half. He is 6 months away from being a legal adult, mind you, and live in Wisconsin. That is a problem within itself. I wouldn't want anybody to live in Wisconsin. Except cheese. Y'all do cheese rather well. My family and I are getting ready for a trip to Somalia, but honestly, I'm not sure if this is actually a trap to get me to stay. First off, I confessed to my parents that I was struggling with the dean in late 2019. So for the uninitiated, what I've kind of gathered what this means is he was having a struggle of faith. And then he says, which I came back to, basically. And after that, things got a little bit distant for a bit. Then a couple months later, they suggest we go on a vacation to the motherland. Secondly, I'm doing mediocre in school in Dhaqan, which from what I gathered is kind of religious learning. and they found out a couple of my friends and heavily disliked them, calling them gangsters and drug dealers. Not true, by the way. I got extremely pissed for me at knowing them. Note, this is around the same time my parents suggested I go on this trip. I really need a plan in case my little vacation is turned into an imprisonment. Appreciated, thanks. I want to just say here that he used the word imprisonment. And so this is kind of part of what I wanted to get to. So, and this brings me to this Guardian article. Now, it is The Guardian. It is run by British people. The most culturally insensitive group of humans on the face of the fucking earth. And the only reason I'm showing this is because I've seen this corroborated by plenty of stories of other people online, both on TikTok and on Twitter, things of that nature. So while, yes, English people suck, they're actually on the right here, and from what I've gathered, their information is actually not too... there's actually relatively on point. Although I think they are coding with a broad brush in some respects. So this is kind of like... Remember how this woman was almost left? And basically, like, experience your culture and shit. Other ones will put people in what appears to be functionally boarding schools. And this is from David Myers, joint head of the Home Office's Forced Marriage Unit in the UK. I'm going to read his quote to you verbatim. What we are seeing in these communities is that young people who have antisocial behavior issues are getting involved in gangs and drugs. And bear in mind, this is not this is not them actually doing these things. This is what the parents' perception is, as we see with this Reddit post. Remember, parents, especially parents that are willing to leave their child in another country or put them in a horrific internment camp like we're going to see with this one, generally care more about the optics of their family than they do about the actual well-being of their child, and therefore don't actually know what the fuck is going on in their kids' lives. They're getting sent back to Somalia by their parents for re-education and rehabilitation. The concept of in Somali culture, DC, means returning to the culture. And to be fair, that is what it means, but he adds an addendum on this, which is, I feel, unfair, but still, it's a horrific practice, to help them rehabilitate, and they are sent to what they call schools, but we call detention centers. We have had reports of physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse within these centers, where they are kept in really strict conditions. So this article actually happened after this particular post, and the reason I say that is because in this thread, they mention how a woman was able to escape and basically get a hold of a UK government official and basically say, hey, all this shit happened. This is and we have a cascade effect to this. These teenagers and children are told that the only way they can escape these centers is to get married to another Somalian, and that is where the forced marriage element comes into it. So this is actually the worst part of it. So you have people that are being just left in Eastern African countries because the parents don't know how to fucking parent and they're bad parents. And I don't care how many people who come pissy in my comment section say this. You are objectively, if you are a parent that will leave your child in another country because you are ineffective at tuning their behavior in a way that you think they'll be successful, it means you are a failure and you are a bad parent, and I will be taking no criticism. Die mad. I'm gonna delete your comments if you get pissy about it. Suck my dick. The point is, I'm pro protecting children. Fuck you. Even if, I care more about your kids than you do. So basically, what ends up happening is that the worst case scenario is that there's an entire, and this is apparently true. There's an entire fucking cottage industry of boarding schools in at least as far as I've seen in Somaliland. Somaliland, by the way, which does not have an American embassy. And I am fairly sure Somalia does have an American embassy. I could be wrong about that, but I do know Somaliland doesn't because it is unrecognized by the UN as its own sovereign nation. So what essentially ends up happening is that people will send their kids, whether it's boys that they think aren't being manly enough, boys that aren't doing what their parents expect them to do, even if what they expect is untenable or even unnecessary when in certain regards, and basically they treat the solution as abuse. Now, they probably presume that their kid is being, indoctrinated and being immersed in the culture at these schools. A lot of times, because money is money, that's not what's going on. There are way too many corroborations of these types of facts for it to be a coincidence of kids as young as 10 being chained up in these schools with horrible latrines, horrible living conditions, being beaten and abused because... So it takes that antiquated third century ideology of abuse, makes people act right. So the people that are doing these kids are basically beating them because they've been led astray, and that's all the thing they need. They're just wholesale taking all of these kids have been led astray. The solution is abuse. So Somali parents are essentially, whether knowingly or unknowingly, sending their kids to these schools for abuse, which I would argue is either at least the parents know where they are. If unlike them just abandoning kids, young girls as young as 14 at the airport by taking their passport home with them and abandoning them in a foreign country. That's not even the worst of it, though. The abuse girls have to go through is the worst. There are plenty of stories of young girls being raped viciously by religious leaders and being forced to, and basically whenever the parents come to visit, all these kids have religious leaders basically to scare them into preventing them from talking about the abuse, because the parent's not going to believe their kid. They sent them to, they are under the delusion that their kid is some Western disobedient brat. Why the fuck would they believe it when there is a religious leader in the corner who's telling them the contrary? One of the biggest problems of people who are bad parents is they don't believe kids. And so young girls continue to be raped at these facilities and abused. It disgusts me and it pisses me off. And it's like one of those things that you don't ever hear about. And I just took a happen chance, and now my entire day is ruined because I am feeling so bad for these kids that like I want to deck somebody's parent, like some Somali parent in the face that did this to their kids on principle. There's even a case in the Guardian article where basically this girl was being told that the only way she could get, some girls have been told that, including one of the girls in this article, were being basically, I'm just going to read you the story. Sabrine had just turned 17 and finished school when her parents forced her to travel to Somalia and put her under immense pressure to marry a man who would go on to rape her on a regular basis. In desperation, and now pregnant with his child, she called the Karma Nirvana Helpline, a charity that campaigns on honor against honor-based violence and takes thousands of calls a year from victims. Sabrine, now 18, explains that her parents had told her that if she did not sponsor the man so he would get a UK visa, she would be sent back to Somalia. Once he arrived, her misery began. He lived with her and her parents and said the man was very controlling and raped her numerous times. Sabrine, who has also underwent female genitalia mutilation as a child, suffered in silence for a long time, once plucked up the courage to confront her mother about being forced to have sex, but she was told she had to endure it as her duty as a wife. Feeling suicidal and believing that she had no one to turn to, she called the helpline. The support worker gave her advice and eventually managed to escape. Now she's in a safe accommodation. And another one, Anna, a professional who had been providing support to a 60-year-old called Sabha, also called the helpline concerned that the youngster would be returned to her home. Sabha was regularly subjected to sexual and physical abuse and threatened with forced marriage. Sabha, who called the black sheep of the family for refusing to wear a headscarf, was beaten up by her father and told by her uncle that if she did not conform, he would be happy to do 15 years in prison. After threats were made to take her abroad, social services became involved and she was placed into foster care. Shortly afterwards, however, social services said she could return home as they deemed her no longer at risk. Her family said that they missed her. This prompted Anato to call the helpline as she... In Anato is Anna's full name. They should have done that first. As she believed social services were not listening to the victim as they think she's just misbehaving and are instead believing what the family is saying. After several calls to the charity, including one where Saba spoke to support workers, it was established that she was at very high risk of abuse and Anna was advised to call the police. She's now safe and will remain in foster care. These are these people's names have been changed. On the lightest end, you have jovial jokes to embrace your culture. Less bad, on the worst end, you have children being completely abandoned in countries that they do not know or do know but have no resources to help themselves. On the even worse end, you have children being chained up and abused because in hurt and taken advantage of. And on the worst, in the absolute worst, you have young girls being forced to marry and repeatedly raped and forced by their family to endure it. This shit pisses me off, man. I like African food. I like African music. Granted, most of the ones I've been exposed to were Liberian, Malawian, a lot of... I know more West African people than East African. But fuck me if this ain't a shit part of East African culture. Y'all need to fucking come correct. I'm not gonna tell y'all how to live your lives or shit on your culture, but what I will say is that if part of your culture is mandating the abuse of children, eat shit and die, kill yourself maybe. The world will be a better place if you're doing that to kids. I'm not saying, and before y'all get all pissy-wissy with me and say I'm trying to strip, I know that the radicals who are viewing this as an attack on East African culture will get pissy with me saying, oh, he's just trying to Western, no, I'm not. Just stop the abuse. I just want you to stop the abuse. That's it. God, some of you parents are fucking terrible. I thought American parents were shit. Fuck, man. Y'all are awful.